Episode 95, August the 21st, 1915. How I Won My VC on Hill 70 by Trooper F.W. O. Potts, VC. Read by David Ridges. A frontal attack upon a strongly fortified Turkish position stretching from Hill 70 to Hill 112 was made on the afternoon of August the 21st, 1915. It was in the course of this advance that the teller of this story, Trooper Frederick William Owen Potts of the 1st Berkshire Yeomanry, was struck down and later performed the unparalleled act for which he was awarded the VC. For nearly 50 hours, Trooper Potts remained under fire with a severely wounded comrade, although he himself could have returned to safety, says the official record. Finally, the trooper, in the extraordinary manner which he here describes, saved his comrade's life. Trooper Potts was only 22 years old and the first yeoman to win the most coveted of all distinctions. I saw a good deal of the Turks before we came to grips with them near Suvla Bay. I'd gone out to Egypt with my regiment, the Berkshire Yeomanry, and for about 4 months we were doing garrison work and escort work for Turks who had been captured in Gallipoli and the Dardanelles and sent as prisoners of war to Egypt. As the weeks went by, and no call came to us for active service, we were inclined to be disappointed. But when the 4 months had gone, the order suddenly came for us to go to Gallipoli. From Alexandria, we sailed in a transport which occupied 4 days in reaching Gallipoli. Here we were transshipped to trawlers and barges and immediately found ourselves in the thick of one of the most tremendous bombardments the world has ever known. We were very lucky in our landing, because we escaped some of the heaviest of the gunfire. The Turks could see us, though we had no sight of them, and whenever a cluster of us was spotted, a shell came crashing over. Thus we had our baptism of fire at the very start. We were in an extraordinarily difficult country, and whatever we needed in the way of food and drink, we had to carry with us, even the water. Immense numbers of tins had been filled from the Nile and taken to Gallipoli in barges, and this was the water we used for drinking purposes, as well as water which was condensed from the sea and kept in big tanks on the shore. Every drop of water we needed had to be fetched from the shore, and this work proved about the hardest and most dangerous of any we had to do after landing and taking up our position on a hill. Several of our chaps were knocked over in this water-fetching work. While we were at this place, we were employed in making roads from Suvla Bay to Anzac, and hard work it was, because the country was all rocks. We had landed light, without blankets or waterproofs, so that we felt the intense cold of the nights very much. We had a week of this sort of thing, under fire all the time. I think it was on a Sunday we landed, and a week later we heard that we were to take part in the attack on Hill 70, or as we called it, because of its appearance, Burnt Hill. There were immense quantities of a horrible sort of scrub on it, and a great deal of this stuff had been fired and charred by gunfire. I little knew then how close and long an acquaintance I was to make with the scrub on Hill 70. It was about 5 o'clock in the evening when the great news came. We were to be ready at 7, and ready we were, and glad to be in it. We did not know much, but we understood that we were to take our places in some reserve trenches. Night comes quickly in those regions, and when the day had gone, we moved around to Anzac, marching along the roads which we had partially made. We reached Anzac at about 2 o'clock in the morning, in pitch darkness. We had a pick and 2 shovels to 4 men, and took it in turn to carry them. Each man also carried 200 rounds of ammunition, so that we were pretty well laden. When we reached Anzac Cove, we moved in right under the cliffs, which go sheer down to the sea. But there was practically no tide, so that the beach is safe. The only way to reach the shore was to go in single file down a narrow, twisting pathway. We were on the beach till about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when we were ordered to be ready with our packs, and we went up the cliff, again in single file, forming up when we reached the top. Then we went a mile or so along the road we had marched over the night before. All part of the scheme of operations, I take it. Then we cut across to our right and saw a plain called Salt Lake, where we watched the division going into action under heavy shrapnel fire. We were now in the thick of the awful country which I was to know so well. The surface was all sand and shrubs, and the great peculiarity of the shrubs was that they were very much like our holly trees at home, though the leaves were not so big, but far more prickly. These shrubs were about 3 feet high, and they were everywhere. But they didn't provide any real cover. There was also immense numbers of long creepers and grass, and a lot of dust and dirt. The heat was fearful, so that you can easily understand how hard it was to get along when we were on the move. These obstacles proved disastrous to many of our chaps when they got into the zone of fire, for the shrapnel set the shrubs ablaze. This meant that many a brave fellow who was hit during the fighting on Hill 70 fell among the burning firs and was burned to death where he lay. As we were waiting for our turn, we could see the other chaps picking their way through this burning stuff and charging on towards the Turkish trenches. When our own turn came, the scrub was burning less fiercely, and to some extent we were able to choose our way and avoid the blazing patches. We ran whenever we got the chance, making short rushes. But when we got into the real zone of fire, we never stopped until we were under the protection of Chocolate Hill. For half an hour, we rested at the foot of this hill. From our position, we couldn't see the Turks, who were entrenched over the top. But their snipers were out and bothering us a good deal. It was impossible to see these snipers because they hid themselves most cunningly in the bushes and had their faces and rifles painted the same colour as the surrounding objects. However, we levelled up matters by sending out our own snipers. We were on the move again as soon as we had got our breath back. We still understood as we moved to the left of Chocolate Hill that we were going to occupy reserve trenches. We went through a field of ripe wheat. About 2 yards in front of me was a mate of mine, Reginald West. I saw him struck in the thigh by a sniper's bullet, which went in as big as a pea and came out the size of a 5-shilling piece. It was an explosive bullet, one of many that were used against us by the Turks under their German masters. In a sense, West was lucky, because when he was struck down, he fell right on the edge of a dugout, and I heard one of the men shout, "Roll over, mate, roll over. You'll drop right in here." And he did. The rest of us went on, though in the advance we lost a number of men. Some were killed outright, some were killed by shells and bullets after they had fallen wounded, and some had to lie where they had fallen and do the best they could. We pushed ahead till we struck Hill 70 again. When we got to the reserve trenches, I asked the chap how far away the Turks were, and he answered, "About 1,000 yards, but I don't think it was as much as that." Now we began to ascend Hill 70 in short spurts, halting from time to time. We had fairly good cover because the scrub was not on fire, though several parts had been burnt out. During one of these halts, we were ordered to fix bayonets. We had found shelter in a bit of a gully and were pretty well mixed up with other regiments, the Borderers, Dorsets, and so on. We first got the idea that we were going to charge for an officer near us, but he was knocked out, with a broken arm, I believe, before the charge came off. He was just giving us the wheeze about the coming charge when a bullet struck him. How did the charge begin? Well, an officer shouted, as far as I can recollect, "Come on, lads, we'll give 'em beans." That is not exactly according to drill books and regulations as I know them, but it was enough. It let the boys loose, and they simply leapt forward and went for the Turkish trenches. It was not to be my good fortune to get into them, however. In fact, I did not go very far after the order to charge was given. I had gone perhaps 20 or 30 yards when I was knocked off my feet. I knew I was hit. I had a sort of burning sensation, but whether I was hit in the act of jumping or whether I jumped because I was hit, I do not know. What I do know is that I went up in the air, came down again, and lay where I fell. I knew that I had been shot at the top of the left thigh, the bullet going clean through and just missing the artery in the groin by an eighth of an inch, so the doctor told me later. Utterly helpless, I lay there for about 3/4 of an hour, while the boys rushed around me and scattered in the charge. This happened about 1/4 of a mile from the top of the hill. I propped myself up on my arm and watched the boys charging. I heard later that the boys got into the Turkish third trench and that the Turks bolted. When they reached this third trench, there were only 17 Berkshire boys left to hold it. The enemy seemed to get wind of this. Then it looked as if all the Turkish army was going for the 17, and they had no alternative but to clear out. After the charge, I saw this handful come back down the hill, quite close to where I was lying. I had fallen in a sort of little thicket, a cluster of the awful scrub, which was like holly but much worse. I was thankful for it, however, because it gave me a bit of shelter and hid me from view. I'd been lying there about half an hour when I heard a noise near me and saw that a poor wounded chap, a trooper of the Berkshires, was crawling towards me. I recognised him as a fellow townsman. "Is that you, Andrews?" I asked. He simply answered, "Yes." That was all he could get out. "I'm jolly pleased you've come," I said, and Andrews crawled as close as he could get, and we lay there, perfectly still, for about 10 minutes. Andrews had been shot through the groin, a very dangerous wound, and he was suffering terribly and losing a great deal of blood. We had been together for a few minutes when another trooper, a stranger to me, crawled up to our hiding place. He had a wound in the leg. We were so cramped for space under the thicket that Andrews had to shift as best he could to make room for the newcomer. That simple act of mercy saved his life, for the stranger had not been with us more than 10 minutes when a bullet went through both his legs and mortally wounded him. He kept on crying for water, but we had not a drop amongst the three of us and could not do anything to quench his awful thirst. That fearful afternoon passed slowly, with its grizzling heat and constant fighting, and the night came quickly. The night hours brought us neither comfort nor security, for a full moon shone, making the countryside as light as day. The cold was intense. The stranger was practically unconscious and kept moving about, which made our position worse because every time he moved, the Turks banged at us. I was lying absolutely as flat as I could, with my face buried in the dirt, for the bullets were peppering the ground all around us, and one of them actually grazed my left ear. You can see the scar it's made just over the top. The wound covered my face with blood. Was I scared or frightened? I can honestly say that I was not. I'd got beyond that stage, and almost as a matter of course, I calmly noted the details of everything that happened. Throughout the whole of that unspeakable night, this poor Bucks Hussar chap hung on. He kept muttering, "Water, water," but we could not give him any. When the end came, he simply lay down and died right away, and his dead body stayed with us, for we could neither get away nor move him. During the whole of the next day, we lay in our hiding place, suffering indescribably. The sun, thirst, hunger, and our wounds all added to our pain. In our desperation, we picked bits off the stalks of the shrubs and tried to suck them, but we got no relief in that way. The whole of the day went, somehow, with such slowness that it seemed as if it would never end. It was impossible to sleep. Fighting was going on all the time, and the noise was terrific. We could not see anything of our boys, and we knew that it was impossible for any stretcher-bearers to get through to us, because we were a long way up the hill, and no stretcher-bearers could venture out under such a terrible fire. Night came again at last, and Andrews and myself decided to move, because it was certain death from thirst and hunger to remain where we were, even if we escaped from bullets. So I began to move away by crawling, and Andrews followed as best he could. I would crawl a little way and wait till Andrews, poor fellow, could crawl up to me again. We managed to wriggle about 300 yards that night, as near as I can judge. Starting at about 6:15, as soon as the day was done, it was about 3 in the morning when we decided to rest, so that if we had really done 300 yards, we crawled at the rate of only 33 yards an hour. A great number of rifles were lying about. I tried many of them, and at last found one that seemed to be in good working order, and to my joy I came across about 50 rounds of ammunition. Another serviceable rifle was found, so that Andrews and myself were filled with a new hope. "We'll die like Britons at any rate," said Andrews. "We'll give a good account of ourselves before we go." And I agreed with him. We were now some distance from the Turks, and I was terribly anxious to shoot at them, but Andrews was more cautious. "If you fire, they'll discover us, and we shall be done for," he said. Then we shook hands fervently, because we both believed our end was near. Together, we offered up prayers. We had managed to crawl to a bit of shelter which was given by some burnt-out scrub, and here we went to sleep, simply because we were too much exhausted to keep awake. It was a fitful slumber, though, for we were nearly frozen, despite the fact that we covered ourselves with empty sandbags which we found lying about. When the morning came, we made a move, and for the first time we were able to get some water, but only by taking the water bottles from the poor chaps who had been killed. Then we crept back to our shelter. Andrews was bleeding terribly. Every time he moved, he bled, but I did the best I could for him with my iodine. I dressed him with mine, and he dressed me with his, and splendid stuff it is. Though we had nothing to eat, we did not really feel hungry now. We were past the eating stage. I was very lucky in having 4 cigarettes and some matches, and I risked a smoke, the sweetest I ever had in my life. Again, we stuck the awful day through. I was terribly anxious to move and get out of it at any cost, but still Andrews was very cautious. "No, we won't try till it gets dark," he said. I felt that he was right, and so we waited as patiently as we could for the night. When the third night on the hill came, we were fairly desperate, knowing that something would have to be done if we meant to live, and that certain death awaited us where we were. We had nothing to eat and nothing to drink except the water, frightful stuff, but swallowed greedily and thankfully. We did not for a moment suppose that we should live to reach the British lines, which we believed to be not far away. But we risked everything on the effort, and in the moonlight we began to wriggle off. We managed to get no more than 6 yards when Andrews had to give it up. I myself, though I was the stronger and better of the two, could scarcely crawl. Every movement was a torture and a misery because of the thorns that stuck into us and the horrible scrub. We had kept the sandbags, and with my help Andrews managed to get them over his arms and up to his shoulders. I fastened them with the pieces of string they have, and these gave him a good deal of protection, though the thorns got through and punished us cruelly. I was picking them out of my hands for 3 weeks afterwards. Having crawled these 6 yards, we gave up the attempt altogether and once more pondered over our lot. We could see a cluster of trees not far away, about 100 yards, and there was one that looked fairly tall. "If we can get to that tree," said Andrews, "I could lie there if I had some water, and perhaps you could strike some of our chaps and bring help." I had little hope from such an effort as that. Then Andrews unselfishly urged me to look after myself, but of course I wouldn't dream of leaving him. I offered to carry him, and I tried, but I was far too weak. What in the world was to be done? How were we to get out of this deadly place? There seemed no earthly hope of escape when, literally like an inspiration, a way out was revealed. Just near us was an ordinary entrenching shovel, which had been dropped or had belonged to some poor chap who had fallen. I can't say which, but there it was. I crawled up and got hold of it, and before we quite know what was happening, Andrews was resting on it, and I was doing my best to drag him out of danger. I cannot say whose idea this was, but it is quite likely that Andrews thought of it first. He sat on the shovel as best he could. He was not fastened to it, with his legs crossed, the wounded leg over the sound one, and he put his hands back and clasped my wrists as I sat on the ground behind and hauled away at the handle. Several times he came off, or the shovel fetched away, and I soon saw that it would be impossible to get him away in this fashion. When we began to move, the Turks opened fire on us, but I hardly cared now about the risk of being shot, and for the first time since I had been wounded, I stood up and dragged desperately at the shovel, with Andrews on it. I managed to get over 6 yards, then I was forced to lie down and rest. Andrews needed a rest just as badly as I did, for he was utterly shaken and suffered greatly. We started again at about 6:15, as soon as the night came, and for more than 3 mortal hours we made this strange journey down the hillside. And at last, with real thankfulness, we reached the bottom and came to a bit of a wood. Sweet beyond expression it was to feel that I could walk upright, and that I was near the British lines. This knowledge came to me suddenly when there rang through the night the command, "Halt!" I obeyed. Glorious it was to hear that challenge in my native tongue, after what we had gone through. Then this good British sentry said, "Come up and be recognised." Not according to the regulation challenge, but good enough for me, and he had seen us quite clearly in the moonshine. Up I staggered and found myself face to face with a sentry, whose rifle was presented, ready for use, and whose bayonet gleamed in the cold light. "What's up?" asked the sentry, who did not seem to realise what had actually happened. "I've got a chap out here wounded," I told him. "I've dragged him down the hill on a shovel. Can you give me a hand?" The sentry seemed to understand like a flash. He walked up to the trench, and when I had made myself clear, 3 or 4 chaps bustled round, got a blanket, and I led them to the spot where I had left Andrews lying on the ground. We lifted him off the shovel, put him on the blanket, and carried him to the trench. These men were, I think, Enniskilling Fusiliers, and they did everything for us that human kindness could suggest. They gave me some rum and bully beef and biscuit, and it was about the most delightful meal I ever had in my life, because I was famishing, and I was safe, with Andrews, after those dreadful hours on the hillside, which seemed as if they would never end. When we'd rested and pulled round a bit, we were put on stretchers and carried to the nearest dressing station. Afterwards we were sent to Malta. The granting of the Victoria Cross, for what I had done, came as a complete surprise to me, because it never struck me that I had done more than any other British soldier would have done for a comrade. I never lost heart during all the time that I was lying on Hill 70. Many old things came clearly up in my mind, and many an old prayer was uttered.
Brother Bertie went away to do his bit the other day, with a smile on his lips and his lieutenant upon his shoulder, bright and gay. As the train moved out, he said, "Remember me to all the birds," though he wagged his paw and went away to war, shouting out these pathetic